So remember that. If you have some quilts hanging out in your room, just think about, well, do I even need a border? And then nope, let's go to just super basic here. So most of these quilts I think we've seen before. So, but when you're looking for borders, you look differently. So this is just taking the background color, which is just a cream muslin, and making an extra frame so it does what we call floats. So the light border tends to have that effect of kind of floating the design. And this is just a little border that just was added because it seemed like it needed it. It could have been finished without any border easily, and that would have been lovely too. One of the reasons I did a border on this quilt is because I didn't make the blocks. I inherited these blocks, and they were made probably by several makers, and they weren't terribly consistent. So the squareness of the finished quilt was a little off, like a lot off. So a border can help you get it square, can help you get it shaped up a little bit, because you can kind of pull and tug and ease and get those skinny spots stretched out a little bit and the stretched out spot eased in. So that's one thing to think about too. Sometimes you have a quilt you're making and your border needs to make it the size you need. So you have a certain bed, you have a kid who's a certain size, and you want it to be long enough. Notice that the top and bottom borders are bigger and then the side borders. So this quilt has that variation just because that's what gave me the right size. And I also could have even made another row of blocks, but in this design, you get the off point thing to work in the corners with 2 rows. So when you add just 1 row, you get a weird corner, and 2 rows would have made it too long. So this is what I decided to do. Now, just a little heads up on backs. Here's a back. And I have no design intention really in most of my backs. I try to use up fabric. I try to think color if I can, but a lot of times they're even a totally different color, and the binding may or may not go with it. But to me, a quilt is when it's on one side, the other side doesn't hardly show unless it's folded over. But if you've made your bed, big if in my house, but if you've made your bed, one side shows. So to me, the back is just for fun. It could. It's very abstract or primitive, or it's nothing terribly fancy by any means. I certainly know some people who make their backs as complicated as the fronts. This is a Quilts for Kids quilt. So our charity group that provides quilts for Missoula's children, and super easy here. With a lot of threads hanging. And this one just has a little teeny border around. That's the background. So, and this is a full 1-piece back. Yeah. And I like using flannel on my backs. Yeah, I mean, this is what 8, 2, 4, 6. Yeah, 8 4-patch blocks. That's it, and then alternating the solid. The solid's fun. Like, I'll pass this around. You can see I was able to do a quilt design in it, but it also could be an applique that makes it more child friendly. If you want to do that, you do stars and moons or hearts or something like that. But so this is just a probably 2.5-inch border, and that's it. this one, I'm not quite done with this, but it's a friend of mine went to visit in Detroit this year, and we decided this was the end of the line, so now it's got to get quilted. And this one, I just used the background and then popped in a little bright color to move it a little bit, to frame it, to end your eye, but also still to give it space to breathe. So, yeah, and this is just a 1-inch strip that's cut 1 inch. So it's only a 1/2 inch in width when it's all sewn. Yeah, yeah, it's a pattern, an applique pattern I bought a very long time ago. And I think faith, hope, and kindness is what they call it. Yeah. So, but yeah. So, and I just press, especially with a light background, I just press in, and a 1 inch has a 1/2 inch space, so everything folds nice and flat on the press.
Do you know what you're going to use for the backing?
I don't yet. I don't. I think it'll end up, I think we talked about it ending up being like on the back of her couch or something. Yeah, so it probably won't show. So that'll be something to think about. So I might just do the white again, because then the quilting shows, and that's kind of fun. Oh yeah, this one. Here's more of that African fabric and bright fabric that I had from Quilts for Kids. And these were the leftovers of 6 quilts that I made, and just made the one block, put it on point, and then put borders. So easy, easy, easy to do. And I like the narrow border, wide border format, and either a light dark combination contrast, although this is pretty blendy. But dark fabrics tend to stop your eye. White fabrics tend to float the design. And so, or lighter. And so this already has the lighter, so it's already floating the main thing. So to me, it was about resting. So I used the dark. It also was about using fabric I had. So there's that. And then this again is just a 1-piece back flannel. And yeah, this is the Quilts for Kids label.
Oh, okay.
So they all have those, any that we give out, and then they can write their name on it. I put it on the back before I quilt it.
Yes.
And then it doesn't show through. But sometimes they.
How wide is your wide?
This wide border is about 5 or 6 inches, and these are often about 1.5, 1 to 1.5. I don't, if I'm just doing kind of a what I call a zinger border, it gives it a little pop. I don't usually do much wider than 1.5. Sometimes I'll do 2. Depends how big the quilt is, I guess. Yeah, and how big the pattern.
So is that 1.5 finished, or just?
This is a 1 inch finish, 1.5 cut. Yeah, thanks. So here's that. This again has the narrow border inside, the wider out. This is also a class sample for the lifelong learning. So we're doing strip piecing. The white border is lighter than the lightest, but not by much. And probably if I rethought it, I might try to get a lighter one between this and this, but it's okay. And again, the light border sort of lets the design float, and then the dark border says done. So
bring something out like that, it almost feels like it lowers the room
temperature. Doesn't it? Yeah. Doesn't it? I love these blues. I just love them. And I have quite a collection of snowflake fabric, so it was really fun to use it. Only a little bit, I'm sorry to say. And holiday, we have jack-o'-lanterns on the back. So that's also just a single piece of fabric. This is an oldie but a goodie. It's the puzzle quilt. We did that in a class here. And this also just has a well, it's probably pieced because it's too wide to be one, but it's, let's see if I can tell. I don't know. Looks like it might be pieced a couple times, but it's just the one fabric. And this, I used what's called sashing between your blocks. So just for some quilt language, sashing is the strip or strips or designs that you use to separate your blocks. Those can be very complex. They can be half square, triangle, sawtooth. They can be diamonds. They can be any number of things. Stars, quite complex. But it's this intended division of the blocks, and so that's sashing. This spot at their intersection is called the cornerstone. It's referenced as a cornerstone when the fabric is a different color, and I have another one to show you that exemplifies that better. And then this is what I call a zinger flange, and it's actually a folded piece of fabric that has 3 dimension to it. And when I quilt it over it so it lays flat, because when it's washed, they'll get really ripply and wrinkly. But yeah, piping is the same kind of thing. Piping tends to be filled and round, and flange is a flat. Yeah.
Now, and the sashing, very complex, like you said. Then do you make the blocks quieter? I mean,
you know, it depends on many factors. But generally speaking, I would say yes. Yeah, generally speaking, I think that is true because you have competitive designs. Yeah. And so yeah, that's not a bad idea to think about. And then this outside border, I tend to use as that brown one I showed, the on point block. It tends to be a blender. It tends to be something that pulls multiple colors in the quilt together and anchors it. This is a Bernartex fabric that if I could get 20 yards of it again, I think I would. It's so gorgeous, and it has such beautiful colors, and it's got purples and rusts and lime greens and orange, and oh, it's just gorgeous. And I've used it a lot. Oh, I know. I just think, oh, and I'll make a quilt and go, oh, you know, it'd be really, oh, I don't have any more of that anymore.
but like that one, I mean, it really does have almost every color that's in your quilt.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. So it worked out quite well because this quilt, I felt like I kind of reached the outer, beyond the outer limits, even on pulling fabrics together. And if I did this colorway again, I think I would make the puzzle blocks a little more homogeneous, I think. But I also like it. I don't know. Sometimes those homogeneous moments are kind of boring. So who's going to bother? This one, again, for the class sample, it's just strips, but they're shifted. So you get this lovely effect. One piece of fabric, snowflakes on the back, so we have winter and fall. And then if your block design is offset, then this has to fill in with your border in order for that design to show up and float. And so that means you need to think about the fabric you're using for your border, because if your seams really show, it's not going to be as cool a float. It's going to be, oh, that's not quite lined up. It's not quite right. And even here at the end, the way this exterior strip is done, it has that little jog. So then it needed that. Anyway, you can take a look at this if you want. It was a pattern I found on Pinterest, and I don't know that I did it the way they did, but it's what went into my head. So anyway,
and
I'm
you
gonna pass
don't
that.
even notice, your eye doesn't even realize that you're adding those extra blocks to make it straight.
Yeah.
I mean, it really,
Yeah. So the type of fabric you use in an offset block is really important because you need to either use a print that's busy enough you can't tell that it's seamed, or it's bland enough, darn near solid.
Well, on that one, did you use the same as the border?
Right.
Yeah. So
I just slipped little pieces in there. And because the moons don't have a lined up pattern, it worked, I think. So yeah, so that was fun. This one moves us into what I reference as cornerstones. And so this piece is one that I got in one of those like well, what do they call them? Pigs auctions or something, you know, a project in a what's the G? I can't think. It's not a bag, but whatever it is. Anyway, and it's somebody else's unfinished pile of stuff. It might be quite close to finish and it might not. And so this is a little applique piece that I got done, and I added this fabric that I had in these cornerstones to make it a little bigger. And I think I might even, I can't decide if I want bigger than that. So I might even play with some other possibilities to go in. But I think because it's appliqued, if I add too much like a piano keyboard and I'll show you one of those, or some pieced border, I think it'd be too distracting. So this may be the end of the line. But I like it, and it's a fun. I'm not much of a primitive design, so it was kind of fun to just inherit it and go for it. No. I do precious little slow anything. So so I don't do much of that at all. Not that I don't value it and admire the people who do. But this is a little bit more of the cornerstone with sashing. So this one's kind of a wild. This is true me, and so these are called cornerstones. It's that intersection. I call these cornerstones in a border, but notice how I could have done this differently and just left these off and had the white come right to that cornerstone. That would have been fine too. But and then then I'd had a decision to make, because it either would intersect with that or it'd come down lower, so that then this would be part of it. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of things to consider. So when you're doing your borders, you just want to take your time. And this is where my tendency to rush and my tendency to, that's 27. Okay, 27. And I just cut and I whack and I sew and I get it on. I'm like, oh, crumb, I forgot the seam allowance. Oh, crumb, I forgot that you needed this little piece there. Oh, whatever. So take your time, slow yourself down, set the pieces next to your final sized quilt top and make sure they fit, and be sure you're not going to get frustrated with it. Because even this is pretty simple, really, but even the simplest of an arrangement can be frustrating if you've now cut this too short and now you have to piece it. And so, yeah, it's a nuisance. I love it too. I just think it works.
I would use a different word.
Oh, this isn't crumb.
No.
Oh, no. I'll tell you. I'm try to be not too offensive when I do public stuff. So anyway, and then this is this fabric, just a solid white inside, and it wasn't big enough, so I went with a piece I had a lot of. So the back has multiple pieces, but again, I use my fabric. That's a great way to use backs, I think, and it's fun. No, it's funny you said that. I joke that my family was bilingual and that we spoke trucker and American. And my mom taught me all the words I learned. She's not around to hear that one, so she can't argue it, but I did. I did. This is this is a fun one. It's just a photocopy on fabric. And I bought a whole envelope of these. They were quite popular in the 90s, maybe early 2000 or something. And I have a lot. And so I was careful to cut so that I had the little bit of white to float. Then I had a nice strong print that could give it the definition, and then float it again, and then add the piano keys. And to me, it's a great pillow size. So it says, and it's very apropos, if you don't cuss, learn to shoot. And that's Thelma Teller, 1895. So the piano keys are just called that because they look kind of like piano keys, but you use about that width, and you just sew a whole bunch of them together, and the back is even quilted, and I like it. Oh, I always find that with an envelope pillow, it pops open, and I don't like that, but yeah. The next ones are pieced borders that I'll just introduce today. These two are the easiest. So this quilt you've seen before, and it is like the piano keys, only it's just little squares. And to me, the star design, it's on point, so it has these floating triangles, and then I did a light, dark, light kind of option, but this being scrappy. And so it was all the fabrics that were in this quilt, because these are real scrappy. And so the two lights, my lights are a mix too, so it worked out fine to have the two different ones. This is just very easy. And when I do my pieced borders like this, I have two ways to finish them. The pillow's done one, and this is mitered. And so I like a mitered border because it doesn't show real distinctly that maybe your measurement of squares didn't end up at the right spot and you have a skinny one somewhere. So this is just a little skinny one right there, but because it's on the miter, it doesn't show. And I'll try and demonstrate that mitering. It's fun. I think mitering's fun, and I've gotten like anything, the more you do, the better you get. So there's that. This one's super easy, and it's just bricks. And as probably is the case, yeah, this brick here is longer than the others, I think. So they're not standardly fit in necessarily, and I just like how that works. So this is an oldie but a goodie, softer than soft, and so the bricks work really well, I think. We're skiers in our house, and so our snowflakes and skier fabric are extensive. This one is this one weighs a ton. It has corduroy on the back. And I really like having a super heavy quilt, but it isn't for everything. And so it's important to remember. And so this is just a bunch of corduroy I had on the back. But remember that your backs can go to the outside edges of fabric content and type. some fabrics like linens and satins and silks, they are washable. They just aren't going to look great on your dress if you throw it in the washer and dryer. But on a quilt, they might be just fine. So try washing and drying so that you know it'll hold up. It's not going to fray everywhere, or it's not going to shrink terribly or whatever. And so try a little piece that you measure ahead of time, and then measure when you're done so that you know that it doesn't change too much. But this border, I needed it longer than wider. So the top and bottom borders have a sawtooth. And then I have the cornerstones are leftover blocks that I have in the quilt. Yes. No, it's okay.
We'll talk about it later.
No, it's all
So
right.
I just finished a top that is fleece.
Uh-huh. Fun.
Fabric fleece.
Okay.
I do not remember, but I just, from the looks of the fabric when I actually put it out, so that I probably didn't wash them first.
Uh-huh. Fleece shouldn't change because it's complete polyester.
Not fleece,
Oh,
flannel.
oh, flannel. Oh, flannel does.
Top.
Yeah, flannel changes
I'm
a
gonna
lot.
put a wool batting in it.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to put fleece on the back.
Wow.
What should I do? Because I've already pieced the whole top. You think I should?
You know, if you
wash it now?
stay stitch the outside of
I
it,
thought about
serger,
serging outside.
I wouldn't serge it only because sometimes serging eats up a little bit more than a 1/4 inch. I mean, it shouldn't, but
I could fold it out some.
yeah, you could make a skinnier one. Anything to stay stitch it, and serging would do that. Just be careful you don't stretch it while you're sewing the outside edges, because they're going to be maybe even sometimes on bias or whatever. So just be really careful to ease it through the machine.
And the wool that they make now for batting, is it all washable? I never really read the instructions.
You know, there are a number of sources natural farmer, based and may not be treated. And then there are some that are commercial, and I would just always look at the instructions. I've known people to throw batting in the washer and wash it and dry it, and then use it.
I just want this to be a really warm quilt for the camper.
Nice.
We were supposed to be living in a camper this winter, and I thought I want
warm is good. That one with the corduroy is my camper quilt.
Yeah.
This one, I'm looking for it. It's right in my hand.
I don't know if it's I know it's yarn. It's wash yarn. You can wash.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah, so I would check the manufacturer instructions.
Yeah, but definitely wash the top.
I think I would, because flannel does have a tendency to shrink more than just woven cottons.
And the fleece, you think is probably okay. Is all fleece polyester?
Fleece, yep, fleece is 100% polyester. It doesn't ravel. It doesn't anything. Yeah. Then this one is I just love this quilt. And this one uses some of the blocks that are in it. So in the center, you'll see the flying geese blocks that are repeated in the border. And this was in a magazine, I think McCall's, and one quilt was made with the flying geese and these edges on it, and the other quilt was made with these sawtooth rail fence. And I put them together, and I actually got my sawtooth from my leftovers of my flying geese. It was a tight fit and a very skinny seams, but I did it. And then this is a example of, oh, not quite enough fabric. There you go. It's whatever. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. So backs to me are not sweaters. Yeah, I mean, don't sweat it, is what I'm saying. Don't, that's the little stuff. And and certainly if you want your backs to be even a whole nother quilt top, then great. But I've not had much success with getting them to line up right, and find it to be kind of tricky. So those are samples. So what do you do? The, this border is done in the partial seam method. So you start at one end of your quilt. I had this piano key. I sewed to here and left that partial seam. On the side where I started, I sewed here and all the way to the end. Then here and all the way to the end. And then the last side is here and all the way to the end. And then you go back and finish that seam. So it's called a partial seam construction. There are blocks that are made that way. There's a lot of clothing actually that has that kind of method. And borders on quilts, I like that when you have a fabric that's directional. I like it for stripes. I like it where you have fabric that maybe is printed in border rows. And then what happens is it creates this pinwheel kind of thing that goes all the way around. So that's really nice. That's probably my favored construction of borders. I tend to do that. So the basic construction can be courthouse steps. So this is a piece I was playing with. What is this called? Convergence? Is that what it's called? I think you have 4 fabrics and you cut all of them the very same way and start assembling the stripes across one way, and then you cut those up in the same stripes and assemble them again. And it's just kind of a fun, it's Ricky Timms, I think, designed it, if I'm not mistaken. Right. And it was ever so popular for quite a while. In fact, quilt shows had a million of them. And I had never made one, and I just thought, I'm just going to see what happens. So I got this. This is the size it ended up, and I found myself going, I am probably not going to hang that as a wall hanging, but it makes a good little baby quilt, I think, but it's not quite big enough. So I'm going to add this. So this would be an example of, this is a really wide fabric, and I can't remember what this is called. It's like kettle cloth almost. It's a heavier cotton. If I heard what it's called, I'd go, yes, that's shirting? Right. It might be shirting or pillow ticking, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, it might be shirting, actually, as I hold one layer of it. Yeah. Like my husband's shirts. Yeah. No, it could be. That could be, because shirting can come in longer than 45. So if this is what I'm going to do, and if I were to do it in the partial seam construction, then I would cut my selvages off, because you don't want to use selvages in your border. It has a different density of weave, and it puckers up. So what I would do, if I have enough, if I'm not like eking out my borders, if I have enough, I go to the end of the fabric on my quilt. Let me put it here so you can see it. Those over. Come here. And then as I'm here, I fold up, and that's the width of my fabric. So I would cut like another stripe, just to be sure I have enough. Well, in fact, I didn't do a very good job. I had a pucker there. So And that's what I mean. Take your time. So here we are. Here we are. Yeah, I'm going to go to there. So I'm just going to cut a rough one. Why? Because I have way too often ended up with like a half inch, not enough, in sewing a border on, and either because of my computation error or because one side of my quilt wasn't very square or, whatever. But by giving myself just that little bit extra, so there's a seam allowance here that gets eaten up, so that gives me a good inch extra, if not more even. And so then this piece here is going to be too short for another one. And this quilt's square, so they're all going to be the same size. Now, when you first check your quilt to see if it is square, I've already spent quite a bit of time with this, and so I did measure it and have a awareness of it being reasonably square. Not bad. What I do is I measure the top border, and it's a little off. And this measures 15 and, let's see, 1, 2, 5, 6, 5/8. 5/8. So 15 and 5/8 is going to be, well, 30. Well, I have a longer measure. I have a nice long 48-inch metal ruler that's used in welding, and I love it. I use it for most of my quilt measuring. Tape measures, of course, are good. So we'll just go the whole thing. It is 31. It's right on the money, 31. Then I'm going to measure the other, and that is 31 3/4. So we're a little off. And 31 3/8. And 31 3/8. Oh, good. I had two that are the same. That's great. So I'm going to say somewhere around 31 1/2. And on my short end, I'm going to pull a little firmer on the quilt and ease the border in. And then that way, were I making a wall hanging, that half-inch difference would show. It would hang on the wall and it'd be not quite right. So by using your borders to kind of make up that difference, then on your longer side, you can ease it in, and on your shorter side, you can ease the border on. So, so that's what I'm going to say. And as you can tell, and as I've hopefully presented in the past, I'm not an exact quilter. And if I get it all sewn on and it's not quite right, I know this isn't a wall hanging. And it's fine. And it's fine. So we'll line these up, cut off our selvages. I have one piece here that's good. And that extra inch that I have will give me the play I need. Oh, and by the way, my friend in Michigan gave me a new cutter, and boy, do I like it. Because you know how the knob loosens up sometimes and your blade gets wobbly? This has a clip and it releases the blade so that, and then you pop it back on. Plus, I really like the True Cut. Yeah. And it comes with a piece on this side that fits in one of the True Cut rulers. I don't like True Cut rulers.
I don't either.
I have trouble. They have the groove, for those of you who aren't familiar. They have the groove that supposedly keeps your blade from wobbling around. So I just cut these all the same, I hope. Yes. Okay. So on a partial seam, we're going to start here like this. And I'm going to sew to about 2 inches to the end. So you just come in here. Should have made a small one to not take up so much time. All right. Now, here in our classes, I've talked a little bit about the importance of really listening to all your senses, to really be with quilting and sewing, to feel the fabric in your hands, to have a sense of the tension of the fabric weave, to know how much this one gives as opposed to that one. And to really look and watch and listen to your machine as you're sewing. If it's giving you some feedback about the sound that's not quite right, stop, take a look. And then as you're feeding your fabric in, I don't like pins. Now, some people really do, and that's great. You probably are more precise than I am. But actually, I'm pretty precise, all in all. I do pretty well. But what I do is I stand out quite a ways from my needle and gently hold the fabric in the palm of my hand. And so I'm just cradling it. And then I use my fingernails to kind of scrape the fabric either underside or top side to make sure they're lined up as they go in. So I'm watching this fabric go in, and if I notice it starts to bubble on the top, then the top has a different fabric tension and I just have to be careful. But if I were being particularly conscious of getting, like say this was going to be a wall hanging and I really was measuring and getting that longer side taken care of and the shorter side taken care of, then I probably would pin quarter. And I might actually pull on the bottom fabric if it's the short side, or pull on the top a little bit, not a lot, because fabric will be a different size if you do too much. So I'm patting it in, I'm easing it. And then as I come up on a seam that needs to go in the direction or opposed to the direction I'm sewing maybe, then I can tuck that in, I can feel it, I can see it coming. And I'm pretty far back as I'm holding. I don't sew up here. So use your whole body to feel it and sit straight, because if you're like this, you're really not giving your brain full pathway messages from your body. When you sit straight, you're allowing all the feedback from your fingertips to go to your brain and give your brain the information it needs. So here we go. I'm going to stop on the first seam only, the first border only. I'm going to stop here at about 2 inches from the end, about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. It's not precise. Now I'm going to slide my fingers back to the start, and this is going to be the seam I'm going to do. Did that make sense? So here's the start. It's lined up to the end of the quilt. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to start up here. So I'm going to take my border, and this fabric I don't think has, I guess it does have a right and a wrong, but I guess we'll be using the wrong side. So it's very vague. It doesn't show a whole lot. Huh. This feels like a selvage, and it is. I don't know what happened. Okay. All right. I don't know what I did, but oh, I bet I do. That was the first one I cut. Okay, so here's where I have my inchish excess. All right. Eyeball, That's about an inch. I'm good. That's okay. So I don't need to pin. I don't need to do anything. I start right on the edge of the fabric, the corner of the quilt. Top. Okay, once I get started, then I take on my position again, nice and back here. I'm not pulling and tugging. I'm just floating everything because borders can make or break your quilt. They really can. They can pucker them up in the middle because you've pulled too tightly. So problem solving. If you finish quilts and you've got your binding on and your binding kind of pulls it in parachute style, okay, so it has a little bit of a bubble, not a huge one probably, but a little bit of bubble. It means that as you put your binding on, you pulled the binding. So it's tight. If your quilt has a tendency to be puffy in the design part of the quilt and the borders are tighter, they're flat, then that means you're pulling your borders. And so you're stretching out the edges of your design part. If your borders are ripply, it means you're pulling on your quilt and your borders are too loose. So whatever happens as a result of the way you're sewing on your borders, if you notice, well, how come my quilts always do this or that? Think about the tension. Think about what fabric is pulling tighter. And then next time you sew, listen to your hands. They're not ears, but listen to your hands' feedback. Are you letting both layers of fabric slide through your hand, just ease through your hand? Or are you pulling on the bottom one? Or are you pulling on the top one? And if you're pulling, it's going to create a tension that won't lay flat. You notice I also, in addition to not pinning, I don't press very often. I do sometimes. I tend to press my quilt out to the border because that's where you're going to have seams. And so if you press into your quilt, that'll be very thick because you'll have seams on top of seams. However, if this were white, I would press in. I would, yeah, because it would show. Yeah. So some color extremes make it that general plan change. I wouldn't call it a rule. Also watch when, depending on the sewing machine you have, like mine has needle down and a lot of machines have that now. As you stop and twist and pull on your quilt, stop before you get going again and see if you've kind of angled off a little, because sometimes you'll have a little blip in your seam and that'll just create a puckery kind of moment. So I'm just brushing, I'm not pulling and tugging, but I am going to finger press this seam because I do want it to lay flat. Here we go. And now I'm going to lay it straight down. It should line up so that it lines up with the top of that first border. And here we go. All the way across. Now, I knew I had a little bit extra, so I'm okay with that. But if you measured precisely, that's where you'd want to line them up to make sure you're getting the right length. So now, rather than take the time to do this, you can see here's where I just finished. So I'm going to go up to the edge, sew this one on and go all the way across. Then I'm going to turn again, boom. And the last one, I'm going to sew here and go all the way down and across the bottom border. And then I'll have to finish this. So that's your final piece. And then what you have is this effect, this pinwheel effect. So the edge goes off to the end here at the bottom, and then here it would go off to the end down there. Is that right? Yes. So that's a partial seam border. Now, if you're just doing straight on seams, you have a couple of fun options. And so I had a quilt. Where did it go? Quilt top. Here it is. No, that's fabric. Here it is at the bottom. This is just an easy, fun little quilt. And if you haven't played around with the 3-yard quilts, they're kind of fun. So 3 fabrics, 1 yard each. And usually the fabric that's used the least in the design is what's used on the border. So, yeah, so it's kind of fun. And what I was thinking on this one is I would use, I already cut it. Okay. A white, okay, there we go. Yep, thank you. Now this one, if I want to, I have lots of options, and this is where design wall is helpful. And so if you have it pinned on your design wall, you can lay your fabrics across and just get the rough idea of them together, and then fold that triangular piece under and pin, and you can see how then the next border might come. I might go ahead and cut strips, and if I have plenty of fabric, I would go ahead and cut, would just cut, well, it's going to depend on several things. One, how much do I have left? And how big is my quilt? And how wide can I make my borders to fit? When I piece border strips, I do, if they're narrow, I piece them on the diagonal like you do for binding. So it'd be on this one. If I had to piece these, I would do them like this, and always sew to the outside of the L to the outside of the L, never from the point to the inside. So you sew from the outside to outside, and then you end up with this diagonal seam. I like that on skinny pieces. I don't like it on wider ones, and how wide is too wide, it's up to you. If I do anything more than 2 inches, I usually just do a straight seam, because I think that it's really hard to get the diagonal so that it really lies nice and flat. You can, and if you're a precise sewer, you can, quilter, you can probably manage that just fine. But as I've said, I kind of just cruise through nice and fast and get it in. And so for me, it works best to do a straight seam. In fact, I even did a straight seam on this. I'd forgotten that I did. So I already put these together. And so if I'm going to do a border that just goes all the way around, I can do this partial seam method. Or because this print, doesn't matter, it doesn't have a direction, it doesn't have anything that's going to really show the seams. All of that sort of thing is just innocuous. So the best thing to do, I think, easiest thing, I should say, is to piece, and I usually start at my short ends, but I don't know why I do. So you could start on your long ends. I think because it's just easiest, and then I'm done with the short ones. So I would measure this and make sure, then I would measure this, and maybe I sewed those for full length. I don't know why I did that. Oh, okay. Do I have 2 sewn here? I do. Okay. Well, this is what happens when you prepare for a class 3 weeks ago and go, why did I do that? And also, I think I do my borders very intuitively. I just am like, okay, how do I want to do this? Oh, I'll just do this. And I start doing it and it works out fine. So maybe I should use, yep, it looks like I need to do that. So I'm going to do this longer side first. Forget what I just said. And I will cut that.
Now, why wouldn't you just do top and bottom and then side?
No reason.
Yeah, 'cause
You
it's
can.
usually
Yeah.
the way the pattern
You
is
just,
do it.
yeah. There's no reason.
Yeah.
One of the things to me is that balance. If you do your long sides first, okay, and whatever shape your quilt is, if it's wall hanging, could be really long, or table runner or whatever. So you do your long sides first. Your short sides pull the two long sides together. If you do your short sides first, your long sides are really long because they go the full length of the added borders. And so it might, depending on the fabric, it might give the quilt a little more elongated appearance. So it really just depends on, it does not matter though. It really doesn't. Unless like you're using stripes or you're using something where that'll be accentuated. So, okay. So on these borders, I'm gonna move this. I usually don't use measurement so much as I use the actual quilt and just cut them right there. So I'm going to get this one. Now remember, if I've got it folded inside out like I do here, my seam allowance is going to take up space that I'm not going to cut on my fabric. So I'm going to measure just to the seam. So I have here, I'm going to go right to the seam. So if you can see this, there's that seam allowance is hanging out over the edge. And then I'm going to lay this down to here. And my cutter. There. Okay, if it's narrow, I may not use a straight edge. If it's longer, I do. Okay, then these two are going to be the same. If you do the partial seam and it's square, all four pieces of your borders are going to be the very same measurement. If it's not square, the two ends will be the same, the two sides will be the same. And same on this style. So this is what I call courthouse steps. And courthouse steps means that you do top and bottom, then right and left, or right and left, and then top and bottom. Either way. And so I've measured these to be my long side. Then when I measure for the tops and bottoms, I'm going to have these added. So I need to make sure I don't measure straight off the quilt, unless I want a cornerstone. And if I want a cornerstone there, it is going to be the measure of the quilt top. Okay. All right. And off I go. And again, you got a lot of seams, you got a lot of cuts in fabric. You could have some variation in the weave and the tension on the fabric. So you want to make sure that you're. Sometimes what I do, I did the wrong side. Okay. Oh well, I didn't do the long sides. I did the short sides.
Well, at least you noticed.
Yeah, there's that. Okay, okay. Well, then there's stitch ripping. And here's the thing about stitch ripping. Boy, you don't want to do anything that pulls and tugs on your fabric because you will stretch out that lovely measurement you just did. So you always want to do something that's fairly gentle. And probably the gentlest, but I'm rushing, probably the gentlest way to take stitches out is to, on the stitching side, to pick every like 6th stitch or so. And then,
Have you ever used one
When
of
you
those
say by
like shavers?
yeah, I
Those
have.
things?
I'm not very good at changing my tools. Yeah, I bet they work great. I haven't used them. So sorry about that. So I did have this on the short edge. So here we go. Now we're ready. Hopefully. There. Back at it. And if you make mistakes, gosh, be gentle on yourself. You know, it's not going to make you feel better to go, oh, what I do, oh, this drives me crazy. I'm always blah 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 blah. You know, I was a mental health professional before I retired, and I want people to love quilting. I want them to feel like it fills their little souls and enjoy it. And as one of my Quilts for Kids buddies says, oh, looks like I was practicing. Okay. Gotta rip that out or put thread in, run out of bobbin. Oh, I just did a whole row that was practicing. I honestly, yes, reverse sewing, I like that. Oh, gotcha. Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, I gotcha. Yes, you are right as rain. And I don't know what I did, you guys, when I'm not, I shouldn't even cut stuff when I'm here at Confident Stitch because I did something weird. I don't know what I did. But anyway, there's that. We'll trim it right off. So when you do the courthouse step style, you cut your borders exactly the size of your quilt. You sew and trim off or cut them correctly in the first place, whichever seems to work best for you. and then you go here. Now, what
So
about
you're doing the opposite ends, right?
yes,
like the 2 sides and then
correct. That is absolutely correct. Yes. So here we go. Yeah, I really like the partial seam method. I really do. I don't know why.
As you're sewing this one, it's funny, I'll click what you were saying, partial seam line. I wrote notes.
Oh, good. No, that's great. And feel welcome to contact me if you have any questions as you go home and do this on your own. Feel welcome to touch base.
So you are going to have a class next month, but not in November, correct?
Yes, October at Lifelong Learning, and then the very 1st of December is a Dresden plate.
No, I mean here.
Oh, here, yes, we're doing one here next month, and then because it's October, yes. I'm like, is this November? No, but not November, and yes, early December.
Okay. I signed up.
Yeah. Well, I can see that I am back in the groove here. I got to get my brain on. I don't know. quite how that happened.
So
Whoops.
yours would be October 29th, the next one here.
Do you know if that's right, Carly?
It's the last,
October 22nd.
oh,
So
so
is it
it's,
third
it's,
Tuesday of every month?
it's not the last Tuesday.
Fourth Tuesday, okay.
Fourth Tuesday.
Oh, we must have a 5-week.
Oh, yes, we've got a.
Yeah.
first of October.
So here's this little one. So here are these little borders, and one on top, one on bottom. Now I just do the same thing, measuring the sides, sew those on. They're done. Okay. Now, then I can decide, okay, here's the other thing though. There's a style of border, and I have a table runner at Lifelong Learning that has this, but they have it on the wall, so I couldn't bring it. But so this is, well, that's not going to do the job. This will work, I guess. Hope it shows on camera. So, nope. Okay. Do ya? We'll see. Oh, here we go. This is working. Third's the charm. Okay, so this is my inner quilt, my inner soul. And I can sew a skinny border to a wide border and sew the two of them, partial seam or otherwise. But if I sew them together, then this inner border is going to go the full length of the outer border. But it's kind of a cool effect because, like, see if it goes like this, then this also comes out, and this comes down, and this also comes down, and this comes over, and so does the inner one. So the inner one makes that pinwheel thing very noticeable. It's not like where your fabrics blend and you don't even notice what way you sewed them. But it's kind of cool. The other is, like we're just doing on the other quilt, is if you do it this way and this way, so you sew your two borders together, sew your short sides on, and then show your long sides on. And then you have this effect of that inner border running the full length, and it just gives it a different look. So it's another way to do it. If you are going to do, toss that in the garbage. If I were going to do a cornerstone on this, my cornerstone would be the same size. It'd be square, but the same size as my border. So this border is, I don't know what size that is. It looks like it should have been 1.5, but anyway. Now I'm wondering, gosh, did I have this cut for something else? 1.25. No, it looks like it's 1.5. Okay. So let's say I wanted to do a little cornerstone, 1.5. So then I'm going to cut, so I'll need 4. And one and a half. So then I have these 4 little cornerstones. So these are going to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my inner quilt. I'm going to have a skinny border and a skinny border and a skinny border and a skinny border. So, and then I'm going to add a cornerstone here, here, and here. But what you do is you sew your first two borders on, then you cut your long ones exactly the size of your quilt top. And you do cut it the size of the quilt top because the seam allowance that's on the end is also going to be on the end of the borders. And then the wider one, I might want to do a big cornerstone of another color there. So I might go like this. See? So then I'd have a little cornerstone and a big cornerstone. So what you do when you're doing cornerstones is you're going to measure your side that doesn't have borders on it. That would be really smart for me. Okay, so here we are. And not all the way to the end of the border, but to the end of the cut edge of the quilt. Okay. Here to here is 24 inches on the nose. I mean 48 because they're 24 twice. On the nose. Oops. And boom. And I'm going to sew 2 cornerstones onto here. 1. And 2. And then this should fit so that the cornerstone is going to match up with the seam of my little border. Okay, so the quilt I'm going to push I'm going to push this up. This seam is going to go up toward the border. The cornerstone is going to go down, but toward this long border. And then those seams will nest. Lovely. And now where I have this cut properly, what I do, not using pins, is I come all the way to the end. I cut, push this down, this up. Okay, nest my little seam at the other end, roll my chair out, and come in and get halfway, and halfway again. And so that's how I try to keep sort of without pulling and stretching and getting everything off. Also in borders, I mean, I almost always do the quilting seams pressed to one side, except in borders and bindings, and then I open them. Because I don't want, those seams have no design value if if they catch light and show up more. And so, so flatter's better. And if anyone wants to look at my very messy way of doing pressing seams, you're welcome to it. If you are a quilter and you are really truly just enjoying the thrill of the design and having it be right, I say go for it. Make it perfect as you can. Karen, I know I've seen some of your quilts and they're amazing. And I have made quilts where I've been more particular. But in general, quilts are for somebody to love, and it's not necessarily going to be something that somebody ever notices about a seam that's thicker and stiffer than another seam and pressed the wrong way and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So it's the roller skating in a snowstorm test or something like that. I don't know. If you can drive by roller skating in a snowstorm and not notice, then you're good. So then here's this and here's this. So not pressed open, but you get the idea. Now, if I decide my wide border is going to go on with its own cornerstone, then the cornerstone has to be the square edges measurement of the width of my border. So if my border is going to be 6 inches, then my square in the cornerstone has to be 6 inches. Okay? So that is borders. How are we doing on time? Oh my gosh.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Are there any questions or things I didn't bring up about? Oh, I didn't show you scallops. Scallops. So scallops are these. So when you have the edge, how do you do that? When you have the edge of your quilt, the only way I know to do scallop edges, especially if it's a straight border, is that you are adding a straight border and then cutting out the scallop. So you're losing a lot of fabric. And it's a beautiful effect. Scallops can be, as this wedding ring, I did not make it, but I quilted it. It can be pointed like this, or it can be rolly. And paper plates, coffee cans, any number of large circular items are what I use for patterns. But the thing is if this had, so with a wedding ring, you have a curved exterior, and this piece is also curved and added. But if you had any one of these quilts and you wanted it to be a scallop edge, you've added your full width border, and then you draw and cut that. Now, if you send it to a quilter, you would draw and mark, but do not cut. And the quilter will quilt to your drawn edge, but the straight edge helps it hold on the machine better. Yeah. And then the other thing about scallops is you use a bias cut binding, because you're going to have concave and convex, and you need it to ease. And so a bias cut binding, if you look online, bias binding, you'll find how to cut it yourself on the diagonal. And it's really very effective and efficient. It's actually a really lovely way to make binding for your quilts in general, because they don't have that final pull or wonky stuff. So
now if you put your binding on first and then cut it up, You have to make your binding a little bit wider.
You know, I've not done it that way.
I mean, because it seems like you're gonna cut off.
I cut first and then put my binding on.
Okay.
Um, because when you get to these corners and the different edges, you really want to I don't know.
Well, so,
Huh.
I mean, I'm just,
I think you'd have to pin, and I
Right.
don't pin. So if you marked and pinned your bindings on, yeah, you'd have.
well, and I
Not
guess
sure.
I'm.
I'll
I'm
look
not-
that
I'm
up
not
when we do
picturing it,
bindings.
right?
I'll.
I was thinking, so you're binding and you sew it on straight, or is it already cut out like this and then you?
No. You're using a bias binding, so it is a straight piece, but it will bend and twist. Thank you. Thanks for sticking with me on that. So we got that answered. Yeah. So if you look here, there's a little poochiness in that concave edge, and so but it kind of absorbs itself because of the bias. And so, and then it pulls around the corners. You don't pull it, but it lays around the corners and folds over very nicely without pulling. Unless your scallop is super tight and deep, if it's really roller coastery, then it probably would have some challenge. But
The bias is really, because it really is, I mean.
it is
It
very
is, yeah.
forgiving. It's really sweet to use, even on a straight edge. It really is. So, and if you look up on Pinterest or Google or whatever, bias binding, you'll find instructions for cutting it and sewing it together. It's kind of weird because you sew this tube together and then cut, and it's all sewn together, which is really cool because oh, I know, it's amazing. It really is. It's really cool. So anyway, so yeah, bias binding on curved edges. Yeah. Any questions online? Are we good? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Look forward to next. I got it. Thank you. Yeah.